It's a project that started in May 2018 for 3 years, and that was extended by 9 months. It will therefore end in almost 1 year. It has a website, it has a Twitter platform. I'm sure you saw them when in the context of your registration, but maybe you didn't see that it has a platform that you can use to navigate newspapers. And it's very much in the spirit of the conference. It's a project that involves 3 types of partners: libraries, 3 national libraries, Austria, Finland, and France. 4 groups in digital humanities, actually not only history, and 4 groups in computer science working together to improve the quality and the accessibility of historical newspapers in several languages, and allowing and verifying that methods developed in the context of the project can produce new research in the humanities. So why focus on newspapers? We know that there's tens of millions of pages that have been digitized around Europe and also outside Europe. It's a gold mine for everyone. I mean, for researchers, but also for individuals, also for schools. It's basically the main problem is that it's very hard to access for very simple reasons. There's a lot of them. They are written in different languages. They are different. They are coming from different sources. They have different layout. If you look at the one in the middle, I think I have a pointer now. The French one in the middle, you can see that there's a mark in the middle where it was folded, and that means something very simple. The text that is there will be very hard to extract, so you will have to read. As a human, you can read the document probably quite easily, but for the computer, all the words that are here are probably misrecognized, which means that if you try to build a collection that contains words that are in this area, and they will not be found because they will not be recognized well. I think given the audience, I don't have to explain too much about that, but to put things very simply, it means that by building collections with queries, you might miss a lot of relevant documents. And the problem is that when you do your research, you have no idea how many you are missing. You don't know if it's actually 80% of what is relevant, and this implies, or if it's just 5%. And this implies that lots of conjectures, lots of assumptions that you make might be wrong, because what you see of the data is maybe only the tip of the iceberg, and the rest of the iceberg might actually contradict everything you will build based on the tip. So yeah, many tools are needed. You need to structure documents. One very simple thing is that you need to find the articles, because digitization consists in scanning pages, getting pictures of pages, but you need to separate each page into articles, which is actually the most relevant level of information. And ideally, at least the most self-contained, and at least that deals logically with different topics than the neighboring articles. Then you need to find the structure, and also one of the problems is that the numerous digital libraries and tools provided by the libraries are often not newspaper specific, so they don't take into account the aspects such as the fact that newspapers consist of articles and not of chapters or pages. Actually, they do, but they consist of pages, but the right level is actually the article. You understood me. And the masses of data that are available are not suited for the analysis by sole human experts, so we need to provide tools to make that more doable. So the goals just reflect what I said now: how to reduce the noise, extract the text, find the articles, do some semantic enrichment, which means finding places, people, locations, organizations, all those things called named entities that are extremely useful and that are the most common items in the typical search that is made on a digital library. Another of our goal was to create language-independent approaches, able to handle the collections of the French, Finnish, and Austrian libraries, which are mainly written in French, Finnish, and Swedish, and German, but also with the goal to serve more than the partners of the project. to provide tools that can be adapted to other languages beyond the scope of the partners of the project. And another very key motivation is to allow for understandable quantitative analysis that can be justified and explained through pointers. So the idea is to, at any cost, avoid the black box effect, to have a machine telling you what you should think, but having no idea why the machine comes to conclusions, which is actually a big weakness of the current work in general, not only in digital humanities, but of the current work in artificial intelligence. We know that artificial intelligence and deep learning gives good results, but most of the time we don't know why. And in many areas, and of course for anything that relates to society, this is an obvious problem. And the other goal is to impact on several languages, but it's also to impact society as a whole. So many domains of digital humanities, but I said it already, the general public, the teachers, journalists, librarians, and so on, which you will see we address, for instance, the teachers with by providing academic material, teaching material. For the general public, accessing newspapers is also letting them do what is the equivalent of a query that everyone has made on Google, which is basically typing your own name and seeing what comes up. A very common query with historical newspapers is typing the name of your ancestors, obviously. And that's it. So basically, we want to serve any language, any corpus, and any domain. And contribute to research in digital humanities and in computer science, because many of the challenges I've talked about in terms of how to analyze documents that have been digitized is a challenge for computer science. So I will go through this very quickly. We focus on the period 1850-1950, but it's just a practicality for within the project. But we have processed 1.5 million pages, which are available in the platform, of which I will tell you a bit more in a while. And everything is designed to allow for more data, more languages, more software, more tools, and to demonstrate that this works in the general context in several languages, to produce research in several languages, based on documents in several languages, sorry, and in different domains. We have several use cases in digital humanities. One of them is based mainly on French documents, and focus on the gender issues and the perception of women. One of them is based on history and the concept of nationality, the rise of nationality in Finland, analyzing documents in Finnish and Swedish, and so on. And so we have different domains and different languages. And the organization, to see more precisely actually what you can get in the platform, I have this very technical structure of the project, where you see that we start from newspapers, digital newspapers, just pictures. Then we have a step where we find the articles, separate the articles. We have a step where we find the text, we extract the text from the pictures. Then we have another step where we extract the place name entities. So it's basically the place names, what I said earlier, sorry, the persons, the locations, the organization, those key features. You could say that basically the most common search terms: stance detection, which is basically telling you for every named entity whether it's given in a positive or a negative context. Something that we can, in the large scale, study to see how it evolves, how it's different from one source to another, from one media to another, from one country to another. And the detection of events, novel events. This results in a second box, which we call the automatically annotated content. So it's basically the same newspapers, but this time it's text. It's separated in articles, and every person, name, location, organization is marked up with a tag that tells you if it's marked up in a positive or negative context, with another tag that tells you for every person who it is, with a link to Wikidata, which means if you have a mention of, I don't know, the King of Sweden, you will have a pointer to the right King of Sweden. So if the text just says King of Sweden, you want to know which one. When you make a search on, I don't know, I'm not very good, I should not have used Sweden, but I don't know, Gustav III, I have no idea if this one exists. you don't want to find answers about Gustav IV. So this disambiguation is done automatically, and every person is identified, and every location is identified, and every organization is identified. This means that we replace persons, locations, etc. with identifiers. And what this implies is that we have the same identifier in Swedish, in Finnish, in French, in English, in German. And this means that you can actually do qualitative analysis in languages that you don't understand, because you end up being able to work with language-independent descriptors. And based on that, we have two more layers, Work Package 4 and Work Package 5, on top of that, that allow for dynamic analysis and for the personal research assistant, where you are able to investigate on collections and get reports and get feedback to allow you to actually understand what the computer is suggesting and why. What I said earlier, avoiding the black box effect. And all this is available to you in the platform. Yeah, one word on the named entity recognition. The project won a competition showing that it actually can effectively extract and recognize those named entities in several languages with state-of-the-art performance. And the platform. The platform is available to you, to anyone. Users are very welcome because we actually want to get feedback and improve it in the remaining time of the project. So it includes 5.5 million pages completely processed in Finnish, French, German, and Swedish. One silver lining here is that in Finnish and Swedish the collection is incomplete. You will not access everything due to copyright reasons, but you can access everything until 1910. Yeah, that includes everything I listed. You can also, I should highlight this, you can also create a collection, because we know everyone has their habits, and creating a platform that is changing everybody's habits is maybe less effective than also allowing you to keep your habits. So you can create a collection, export the collection, and analyze it with the tools that you already use. And there's lots of videos to explain you how to use the platform. And the videos that you're watching now, you can actually access it also in our YouTube account. There's open science. You can find all the papers, all the data sets in a Zenodo account. You can find the source code. You can find educational material, which I mentioned earlier, and a lot more on the website. And as I said, the project is now entering a second phase where it's been completed. It should have been completed. I mean, it is completed actually next month, but we got an extension to make it known, because of course the COVID crisis impacted a bit the effectiveness of our communication. So we have 9 more months to do what the Commission calls, European Commission calls exploitation, which is putting the project in use in different contexts. And we are very eager to get users to do that and to get feedback and to make it better. Yeah, so in summary, NewsEye is, I think I said it all, NewsEye is there to ease the access to collections of historical newspapers with everything that I mentioned, with a focus on making quantitative analysis that is explainable qualitatively, or maybe simply to help guiding the qualitative analysis, or maybe to make qualitative analysis in a better context by better constructing collections and so on. And the idea is to sustain the project once more. The platform we are trying to have it stay. There's a few other sub-projects that will go on even when the project is ending. So we hope to welcome you and to get feedback and to be able to make the platform useful for everyone. But now, back to what's past this prologue. After this introduction, we have very exciting program with 4 keynotes who will speak just after me. And as much as 25 talks, as I counted, with program that is very vast. from classification, OCR issues, and of course a lot of actual humanities research in the digital context. So welcome and enjoy. You have now 1.5 days ahead of you of exciting talks, I hope. And I think I'm ready to give the floor to Eva, who will moderate.
Hello, Antoine. Yes, I think this is the point where I'm supposed to take over. Thank you for this really wonderful run through our project. It sounds perfect after 3 years of working on it, of course. Hello and a very warm welcome also from my side to all of you joining us here at the final NewsEye conference. Before we start, also from my side, please reminder, use the hashtag WPIP21 on Twitter. I would like to hear from you. I've seen some of you already started with this. Thank you. Another reminder, please put questions in written form during the presentations and the sessions in the chat. This will be moderated by our very helpful colleagues from BNF, Marion Ansel and Amanda Manori. Thank you both for doing this tedious job, but also and especially for organizing this conference for us. It has been a pleasure. Very big thanks to all the helpful hands that were involved in making this conference happen. That's mainly, of course, the teams from BNF, from the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, and from ÖNB, the Österreichische Nationalbibliothek. Also, thanks to the entire team from the NewsEye project. Antoine, to you, very special thanks for bringing together such a wonderful interdisciplinary group of people for this really fascinating project with many facets. Final thanks, I'm almost done, of course, to all the moderators for the upcoming sessions, and especially to Sally Chambers from the Royal Library of Belgium and Ghent Center for Digital Humanities, who has taken over lots of tasks she didn't even have to take over. We are very grateful to her. One thing, please be reminded, each session will be recorded, but we will switch off the recording buttons, so to say, during the general discussions. So after the sessions, after the presentations, you can also, hopefully, we hope to manage, put your questions if you turn on the microphone. Let's come to the contents of the upcoming discussion. In the first semester, I always explain to my students, history is like a puzzle that has fallen into a river. Even if we are able to retrieve the puzzle pieces shortly after this event happened, in that case, it might be that we have some missing pieces. It might be that we have broken parts and some of the pieces might have dissolved or will no longer be recognizable. And of course, everything will be spongy and mushy and wet. It becomes more difficult to put the pieces back together if the puzzle, so to say, remains in the river for a long time. This means for us as historians, history becomes more difficult to reassemble if the past that we're trying to reassemble is further in the past, or if more information is missing. Also, we have to think that cultures and societies are changing over time, and we may be living in a contemporary society that is no longer able to understand the meaning of the puzzles as it was originally intended. So there is a lot of interpretation and inference when we deal with historical materials in all the fields of the humanities. Add digitality to these aspects, and we are at the core of today's conference, and especially at the core of the work of the experts that we have invited for this initial keynote round of discussion. My name is Eva Pfanzelter. I'm a professor of contemporary history and also the deputy head of the Digital Humanities Center at the University of Innsbruck. I have the honor to moderate this discussion here online. And this is also the point where I would like to call the participants of the discussion to the stage here with me, please. Anne Dooms from the University of Brussels in Belgium, Clemens Neudecker from the Staatsbibliothek zu Berlin in Germany, Gerben Zaagsma from the Luxembourg Center for Contemporary and Digital History at the University of Luxembourg, Ian Milligan, please, from the University of Waterloo in Ontario, Canada, and Antoine, you please remain and stay here with us. It's so nice to see you all here. We will wait until everybody's online. Just for the participants, let me just quickly explain how we were thinking of doing this now. It is an online discussion, so we will have to moderate it a little bit stronger than maybe in a normal setting. So we will ask the keynote speakers now to individually present their professional backgrounds, their projects, very shortly, please. And then we will have 2 rounds of questions that I will lead. And finally, we will open up the stage to everybody here. And so also to the audience to participate in a hopefully very fruitful discussion. Okay, I am now basically bringing my own expertise into the front. I will ask Anne Dooms to start this round of discussions. Ladies first, I would say I'm a lady, so I invite Anne to please give us your short introduction to your job, your projects.
Oh, thank you, Eva, and thank you for the organizers for inviting me here and the closing conference of this wonderful project. I prepared some slides, which I will share with you to explain what we're doing at our lab. So I used the title, "An Image Says More Than 1,000 Words." I'm a mathematician from the Department of Mathematics and Data Science at the Vrije Universiteit Brussel in Belgium. And you might say, what does a mathematician have to do with images? Well, to explain that, I like to use one of the most famous Belgian paintings, Magritte, Ceci n'est pas une pipe. It's a painting stating that, of course, a painted pipe is not a real pipe, it's a representation. And just like that, digital images are a representation of our reality, and they do that in pixels. And for a computer, pixels or a digital image is actually a large table of numbers specifying the color of those pixels. So we can actually load images in Excel. And then you see already the pattern of that pipe appearing. And that's because, well, you have that the numbers, black is, for example, 3 times 0, 3 times for red, green, and blue. And then we go up to white, which is 255, 3 times. So you can see these patterns arising because of the scale of the numbers. So if we zoom in, you indeed see that those black zones have a lot of zeros here. So we can actually treat images as large tables of numbers. And then, of course, the mathematician comes in. We can do computations on that. Now, mathematicians are not calculators. We're actually the ones that invent the computations that have to be done. And math can actually help you read newspapers. And one of the first books or texts that were being read automatically is this one, The Stream by Robert Murphy. You see that appearing on this picture over here. Probably some of you recognize this person. This is Ray Kurzweil. And in mid-70s, he invented the reading machine. It was invented for blind people or people who couldn't read. And he was putting the book on the scanner, and then the computer would recognize the text and read it out loud. And so, as you can probably guess, this was the beginning of OCR, optical character recognition, also the beginning of flatbed scanners. And so the first one actually to digitize text. And how did he do that? Well, he, of course, also looked at this table of numbers. Back then, I was looking, of course, at black and white images. So you had zeros and ones. And he recognized the characters by actually looking at patterns within those numbers. So an A in each font, actually, or a capital A, can always be recognized as two long stripes with one horizontal in between. So he created rules to recognize these characters. However, it took until the mid-90s before OCR actually became commercially available. And still, there are some problems with OCR. If you would give this newspaper, maybe some of you already tried, to an OCR, it will completely get confused because of the bad quality of the text. So we have some holes here, but we also have some problem at the creases, just like Antoine showed with his example in the introduction. So there are some problems still to be solved with OCR. And then this is, for example, a close-up scan of some other old book, and where OCR actually starts to guess these words wrongly. Of course, there have been many attempts to solve this, and one of the most well-known, or actually the CAPTCHAs, invented by Louis van Aan in the beginning of 2000, that actually helped to digitize old books, and was or the technology was being sold to Google, who used it for Google Books. And then, of course, you can use these crowdsourcing attempts, so with people recognizing these words. Just also like Antoine explained, we can recognize these words, and we can help machines to get better at recognizing letters. And then we end up with neural networks that are very good at classifying and finding patterns, and then also finding letters or finding zones of text, of course. But if we look at these distorted papers, we still have that computers, even though we can apply neural networks, are still not capable to deal with these. And even if we are looking at clean samples like this one, where state-of-the-art OCR software gets confused. We actually have a complex layout with images mixed with text. And if we run a Bfine reader on this is the output, and actually the whole zone over here gets recognized as one big image, and so lots of text is actually being lost. So due to the complex layout and also even if it's a good paper, the quality of the digitization makes it difficult. And that's where we come in. My student Tanlu looked at this problem from a perception point of view. If we look at this excerpt from Vogue magazine, we are actually, as humans, for us, it's very easy to recognize the text, even though this is a very complicated layout too. But we immediately know this is text because we are actually making use of what is known Gestalt perception, or what is described by Gestalt perception, is that we actually recognize text as it exhibits a certain pattern, a pattern that can be described by several characteristics. And here are the three main ones, actually. Proximity, things that are close together, we tend to see this in groups. Similarity, of course, expressible in many ways, but here, for example, you see similar color. And then symmetry, even though these things do not consist of the exact same shapes, we recognize a connection or a similarity between those two shapes. And these properties can actually be quantified mathematically. And then we can say that text is a zone within a page that has displays this pattern in a homogeneous way. And this is how we developed a document segmentation algorithm based on homogeneity, and has a probabilistic factor. So it gives you a probability of, or a likelihood of being text. And we did this by looking at the text or representing the text and using a graph representation. And on the nodes of the graphs, we have our characters, and then we actually link them by weighted edges, depending on the similarity. This is in a way machine learning. We don't use neural networks to train, but we use the machine to look around on a page and learn from the page which zones are text, because they are having a homogeneous pattern, and which zones are not text. And this approach is actually very promising, and we won the IGDAR competition in 2019, the competition of recognition of documents with complex layouts. You can see some of the test cases where our algorithm is capable of finding the text and images, even though the layout here you have skew stuff, and here the layout is quite difficult. If we run this on this former example from a newspaper from the library, where Abby Fine Reader fails, you can see that that our output is much better at grasping images and text zones. For the moment, we're improving the SPH towards the direction of distortion recognition, like the bad sample that you saw before. So we're also teaching the algorithm to find distortion zones, which might seem easy, but it's also a very daunting task, for sure, at the edges, of course, of those zones. So this is work that we mainly did in the context of the ADOX project, which is a federal research project that we did together with the Royal Library of Belgium and the CG And this research will continue in a new lab that will start from October 2021, the KBR Data Science Lab, which will work in close collaboration with the already existing lab, KBR Digital Research. So we will help to make what's past is Prologue. Thank you.
Thank you, and it's very interesting what you showed us. And of course, we could jump into these topics and try to find the better ways on how to solve these problems, probably all together. But before we do that, let me ask Clemens to join us here and introduce his work, his projects. Clemens, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Eva and Antoine, for having me, and also thanks to all the organizers and to Antoine and Eva for the nice introduction, and also for this very interesting approach that we've just seen. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. But before that, I'm also gonna share some slides briefly, just to give you a bit the angle where I'm coming from. So yeah, I hope you can see the slides now. So yeah, just briefly introduction, so that you know who you're dealing with. I'm a research advisor, or in German Forschungsreferent, at the Berlin State Library, where I manage a team of currently 5 developers. We're all on project-based work. And yeah, I've been doing this for about 20 years now, almost, R&D in digitization, in digital libraries for document analysis, always with the aim to bring all the cultural heritage that we have in these collections online and make it free, accessible, and usable for everyone. And yeah, like Eva said in the introduction, I'm just going to briefly give a bit of an overview of some of the activities and projects that we are doing in this area, and then I will speak a bit about some of the challenges and some ideas or visions for future work that I hope we can stimulate then for the later discussion. So yeah, I work for the Berlin State Library. It's the largest research library in Germany, based in Berlin. So historically, and also still today, we are based in 2 locations, which was the former east and the west of Berlin. And the library is also part of a bigger construct, combining also the Berlin State Museums, an archive, several other institutions which are under the umbrella of the Prussian Cultural Heritage Foundation. We have an in-house digitization center, and we manage our workflows using the Keynote open source digitization software. And here you have some links for our digital collections. We have currently about 180,000 documents digitized and about 10 million pages of newspapers, which are very much requested. 2 weeks ago, the newspaper portal was actually hacked and had to be taken down. So I'm very glad that as of this week, we have a new version online, and similar to what Antoine said, it's very much requested with about 20,000 users per day. And since recently, we also have a lab. But yeah, going to some of the activities that we have, especially with newspapers. So the Berlin State Library has been a subject collector, national collector of newspapers for many decades. So newspapers have always been very high in our strategic agenda. And so we're also one of the partners working on the German national newspaper portal for digitized newspapers. So obviously there's newspaper collections digitized throughout the country in various organizations, and for users it would really remove a lot of trouble to have one uniform portal where you can access all these digitized newspapers. And this is something that will probably launch in middle of the year. And specifically, we've been working together a lot with researchers to include also some features that are particularly relevant for research use of these materials. But also in the past, we've already been very active in this area. So for example, we've coordinated the Europeana newspaper project, which was the first European newspaper portal that brought together about 12 million pages with a full text search based on OCR from about 12 libraries. And unfortunately, the service that was originally established was closed at the end of 2016, but we are now thankfully again able to access this data through the Europeana platform, where we are also still working to improve the access and usability of this collection. But yeah, so to make these newspapers accessible, similar like all the other printed materials, we really need OCR. So we're also involved in a big national project called OCRD, where we're developing a whole framework, including specifications, technical tools, guidelines for historical printed material for OCRing. And yeah, so we've just entered our third phase, going from the development of prototypes to productive implementations for different use cases. And you're very much invited to look at some of these links and explore those resources further after the conference. Another key project at the Berlin State Library that we're very happy to have is Curator. It's a substantial national project to use AI technologies for data curation in various domains, and we work specifically on cultural heritage. And this really allowed us to take current state-of-the-art technologies like BERT, like others, ResNet, UNet, and really adapt them and apply them to the use case of historical documents. And also here you can find a lot of open source software and information following these links. So what we also do in the Curator project is what Antoine just described. So once we have the OCR, we try to detect the names of persons, of locations, etc. And we're now working also in a project with scholars from the digital humanities who are doing historical social network analysis. And we're using, for example, these entities, these person networks to feed into this historical social graph to be used for exploration. So you see it all comes together in the newspaper. And the good thing is, well, thanks to these advances especially in deep learning, we have really made enormous progress for OCR, and there's some really great new resources like the GT4Hist data set that allow us to OCR such columns like here from a newspaper almost error-free. And even if we have mixed fonts of Gothic and Antiqua, with a language-independent model, so we get almost error-free OCR. But the problem is, especially with newspapers, these OCR systems, they work on lines, and so you need good layout analysis beforehand to actually derive the lines that the OCR needs to detect and recognize. So what is currently a staple also here, and I'm very interested to see, unfortunately there will be no ICTA competition on segmentation this year, which is a pity, to see how that also compares with the methods that Andooms just described. So we are basing our methods on a classical or typical deep learning model using a convolutional neural network. And we did 2 iterations of this, one where we just trained basically from ground truth data. And then we found we had some issues, especially with headers and with reading order. And so we decided to add some heuristics, some in-domain knowledge about the layout and the structure of newspapers. And we found that this significantly improved our results. You can see here on the left and right the comparison for the first and second iteration. The problem is you cannot have enough ground truth for all the varieties that you see in the newspapers, and there's still many challenges. Like, for example, here this is a key challenge we have with the newspapers: very tight columns and the failure to really detect the columns separately. So we've been able here also going through iterations to improve on that, but this is really a key factor if you want to use the resulting content for text and data mining, for analysis, where you really rely on retaining the correct semantic structure of sentences, columns, and articles. And so in order to do that, for example, with multiple columns, you need to decide what is the correct reading order, what is, so to say, what belongs to one article, and where does a new article, where does a new content unit commence, and how are they, what is their sequence. And so I hope you can see it here in these thin red lines. There can be multiple interpretations of that, and it's always not so easy to decide, even for a human, what is the correct one. Here's another example just to show you the complexity this can quickly assume. And so yeah, with that I want to wrap up and give some vision or some statements that I think what we still need in order to succeed in facing these challenges. And I think yeah, the theme of multimodality and interdisciplinarity can really capture that, because what I think is we need really more data, more ground truth data, specifically for historical newspapers, because there's just such a variety. And this ground truth data, it needs to have a very granular level of annotation. And obviously it should be representative of the print history of newspapers, so that we can really have a good holistic view on what are the challenges and a good baseline for evaluation. Obviously, these data should be free for researchers, but everyone to use. And this could lead into really improving the methods for analysis and the models that we have specifically for segmentation of historical newspapers. And I think a key element here can also be the combination of computer vision, like we have now with the CNNs, for example, including now also large language models, like, for example, BERT, GPT-3, that look more at the content and at the semantics and use that as an additional feature to reconstruct the correct layout and sequence of the content. And here also we can really benefit from leveraging the knowledge of the domain experts, of the curators, who can help us build rules to understand these newspapers. And last but not least, we need to really work on this as a community, including computer scientists from computer vision, natural language processing, digital humanities, and curators and librarians to come up with complete and comprehensive metadata standards for the content, for the structure, and also from the viewpoint of evaluation, this should be really use case driven. So we very often look at OCR as merely character error rates or word error rates. We're not looking at layout, whereas this is really very important for many use cases, especially using natural language processing. And here's a couple of examples just to conclude. So there was a shared task in this area that Antoine already mentioned about named entity recognition, and congratulations here. The team from NewsEye from L3I really won this task with great acclaim. And I'm also very happy that we're going to start this community discussion with a due to COVID postponed Darkstuhl seminar, also jointly organized with Antoine and Maud Ehrmann. And I think, yeah, we need more such interdisciplinary projects like NewsEye, Impresso, also oceanic exchanges, and also conferences that bring together these different scientific fields. And also open resources like the Digitized Newspapers Atlas that everyone can study and also contribute to. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Clemens. And I see already people typing and writing emails to you. But before you vanish into the parallel session, so to say, please stay a little bit with us here. And also, we all hope, of course, that the German newspaper portal is going to be realized finally. It's been a long way. And so we're looking forward to that. Thank you. Clemens, please, maybe if I may, Gerben Zaagsma from Luxembourg.
Hello.
Hello.
And, from Luxembourg, but actually joining from Berlin, where I'm living and in lockdown. So hello.
Hello from Berlin.
Let me actually see how this is the first time I'm doing a conference on Microsoft Teams. So I need to figure out, of course, how to share my slides now. Oh yeah, there we go. I will share my screen. Okay, there we go. I'm very sorry, 1 second, because I'm not succeeding in actually simply sharing it.
But Gerben, you found the button, all right, where you can upload or basically either share your screen.
I'm scrolling. Ah, there we go with the, now we probably, okay. Can you see my screen now?
Perfect.
Okay. So I am briefly, actually, I'm mostly going to talk a bit about a project that I'm doing, which is called the Politics of Digitization, but very briefly about my background, historian who works at the Center for Contemporary and Digital History in Berlin. I have a background in history, but also in Yiddish studies. I also worked for a couple of years for a public history consultancy where we actually created a CD-ROM that I cannot play on my computer anymore. This is back in the 90s, actually the period when we were sort of transitioning from history and computing to what is now digital history. And while I was doing a PhD at the European University Institute in Florence in Italy, I also created 2 information portals, one Yiddish Sources relating to my own research, and a website called European History Primary Sources, which is basically an index of digital archives and libraries, which can be, it's sort of like a JSTOR for digital libraries and archives, not being able to search in the contents itself, but if you're sort of interested in all the newspapers that relate to, let's say, Hungarian history, in the 20th century, then you can very, very quickly narrow that down. So I sort of have a background in web development, but also I'm very interested in this question of information management for humanists. After all, humanists and historians these days are information managers. So we need to deal with that. And within that context, we're actually also doing at the moment a small project at the C3DH, which I'm leading, dealing with Jewish studies and digital humanities, where we're also creating an information portal with entries on projects, on events, on news, a linked Zotero library, a database of people involved, sort of to create a community as well of people in Jewish studies who work and who intersect in their work with digital humanities. So this broader interest of humanists as information managers, how do we navigate available online resources and what helps or hinders that request? Perhaps more broadly speaking, what is actually available online and how does that shape historical research? And from those backgrounds and those interests come to current projects, the history of digital history and the politics of digitization. And I am, for the sake of time, these are some slides from a longer presentation that I've done a couple of times, and I'm really with big steps going to run through a couple of slides just to give you a taster. So the idea of this project is basically to take as a starting point Roy Rosenzweig's quite well-known, almost 20-year-old mention of a culture of abundance that we are facing as historians. But the premise is a bit that this culture of abundance is not, or is still rarely qualified and contextualized, and that is really important. There is a question why, where, and how we can access what we can access. That is, of course, dependent on digitization, because archives are carefully curated selections, whether they are analog or retro digital. And the importance is actually there that historians tend to turn, especially students, increasingly to digital sources, either completely or as complementary material in their research. So there is a question, how is our evidentiary base actually changing? And more broadly, what then are the politics of digitization? And yeah, what are the implications for historical research? Of course, these questions fit into a sort of broader critical turn in digital history and digital humanities that we can witness in the sort of past decades. Now, very briefly, a point about digitization. If we actually talk about digitization, it's clear that in Europe, as you can see on this slide, a lot is being digitized, but it's always important to keep in the back of our mind that a lot is not being digitized. So and probably will never be digitized. So there's always this question, what is online, what is offline? How do we balance that? How do we relate to that? And then in Europe, of course, we are very, very well off compared to some other parts of the world where there is much less investment in digitization. To my mind, there's only one report that sort of globally tries to look at digitization, which is this report from the Economist Intelligence Unit, published a couple of years ago. I stand corrected, by the way, if anyone has surveys that deal with the state of digitization on other continents outside Europe, I am most welcome to hear about them. But the bigger question here is, of course, what are exactly these politics of digitization? What are the political dimensions that we talk about when we talk about dealing with digital resources? And I always like to use as a starting point for that discussion an article by Richard Brown and Beth Davis Brown from 1998 called The Making of Memory. I think that's a very seminal article in which they outline a number of political dimensions of archival and curatorial work in the analog context. And what I've done in this table is basically put those dimensions as they mention them on the left, and then their digital equivalents as I see them on the right. So, for example, they talk about collections that are being allocated in the digital context. That would be the question, which institutions digitize and who actually controls our digital collections. They talk about collection development, what is being collected, what is also stored but not cataloged. In the digital context, that would be what is actually being digitized, why is it digitized, and what is metadated. Cataloging and classification is another issue in the digital context that is about how are things being. Yeah.
Gerben, I'm sorry, I have a feedback from the audience. They can't see your slides, or we just keep seeing the first slide.
If I do it like this, can people see the slide?
Yes.
Okay, that is.
Better.
Make it
Thank you.
big. Yeah, thank you so much for pointing that out. Apologies. Very quickly, so I was talking about these political dimensions of archival and curatorial work, and now you finally see the scheme. Brown and Brown distinguish four points there when they talk about analog archives, so to speak, and I've put their digital equivalents as I see them on the right. So as I was talking about allocation of collections, who digitizes, who controls collections, collection development, what is being digitized and selected, what is metadated, what is not metadated, and thus less easily accessible. What is cataloged and classified, so how is that done in a digital context, and how is it metadated, what schema are used. And then there is the issue of circulation and access. So how is access provided in the digital context, and how is access to digital resources actually being mediated? There are a lot of scholarly dimensions and context to this question. I just want to point out there is, of course, the broader issue of the politics of heritage and preservation, and questions of archives and how they relate to social memory, but I'm not going to discuss that too much in detail. Within the context of history and digital history, it's important to keep in mind that actually the nation still matters quite a lot. In a lot of ways, digitization is still somehow nationally framed. Whereas there are also post-colonial dimensions there, and specifically now in recent years in Eastern Europe, people have where in Eastern Europe, as we know, the past is a battleground, and that affects, of course, discourses about digitization. It's always a little bit striking that in Western Europe, people do not really discuss that much how selection in digitization actually takes place. But for example, if you look in Germany at the field of Osteuropa-Forschung, that is really an important debate these days. So just to very, very quickly round up, selection, of course, involves a number of criteria that can have to do with preservation and with preserving collection highlights and often used materials, but also with research value and especially memory politics, and all of these criteria are reflected in funding. But, and that is a key point, selection criteria are not often made explicit, and that's actually where I want to go to. Here again, why does this all matter? Of course, the question is how it affects historical research, what we can research, what we cannot research. So how do we make historians aware of opportunities while simultaneously promoting, let's say, awareness of how digital resources are constituted and promoting digital resource criticism? And I see two important things there. One, perhaps more generally, is that I think it's important that historians start to engage much more with the work of digital archivists and librarians and information scientists, who are really at the forefront often of this digital turn. But very concretely, what I think would really help a lot is if we start thinking about developing a set of what you could call transparency guidelines, where basically every digital resource has a page that outlines how is this being funded, what were the selection criteria, why can I find what I can find there, how have metadata been approached, what schema have been used, how is access being provided, what choices were being made in terms of interface and search options, which after all determine what you can get out of that resource. And perhaps also coming back to that issue of the balance between offline and online, linked to relevant catalogs of archives that might not have been completely digitized, but the catalogs are, and also point to offline sources, so to give sort of fuller picture of those digital resources, contextualize them a little bit, but make it for especially professional historians who work with those resources much more easy to actually assess, like, what are we exactly dealing with and how does that play out or might shape our research. That's it. Thank you very much. And I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Gerben. Of course, a lot of very important questions and also things that you pointed out. And there's also already a question from you in the chat if you want to have a look. But before you answer that, I would like to ask Ian Milligan to join us here, I think from Canada, right?
Yes, the Waterloo in Canada.
From Waterloo in Canada.
Yes, let me just
share
share my...
is all yours.
Wonderful, thank you. Before I start, I'll just confirm you don't see the speaker notes, you just see the slides, right?
Oh, no, we see you.
Okay, but you don't see my, okay, excellent. So thank you, Antoine and Eva, for the wonderful invitation to speak with you all here today. My name is Ian Milligan. I'm a historian, but I've been thinking about how things like newspapers are transforming historical scholarship for almost a decade. I also do tools development with web archives. I help run a project called the Archives Unleashed project alongside library colleagues, computer science colleagues, and the Internet Archive, and just more broadly think about the intersections of technology and research. So what I'm hoping to do here is provide a sort of user perspective as a historian. And I'll start with a somewhat provocative claim that all historians are digital historians. That might seem that it only applies right now as historians are shuttered away from their physical archives over the last year and a bit during our pandemic. But I think it's held true for the better part of the last decade, that as we see with everything, COVID is accelerating, but not inventing trends. So let's see, how does a historian imagine that they work? Well, they do a literature review, they find their research problem, they identify primary sources, they analyze them, they write, they revise, and they present and they publish. And we imagine ourselves sitting, looking at texts and working in archives and living in a sort of antiquarian lifestyle. But of course, how we really work, as we know at a conference like this, is we do almost everything through our computer screens. We do our literature review shaped by digitized and non-digitized resources. We identify our primary sources through online finding aids. We analyze our primary sources doing what I'll be talking about today, keyword searches in databases that we barely understand, of documents that we don't know the provenance of, and only then do we write, revise, and publish. So all steps of the historical research workflow are done through screens. Now, historians know that their archives transform historical work. As Alexa Walsham argued in a recent Past and Present, historians are vaguely cognizant of the role that archives play in shaping our histories, but historians still tend to treat them as quote-unquote neutral and unproblematic reservoirs of historical fact. That archivists and historians shared our common origins, but we have diverged. And I was really inspired by a quote by Bluin and Rosenberg in their book, Processing the Past, where they argue that any visit by a historian to an archival institution is now an exercise in interdisciplinarity. And so if we begin to think of using our archives as historians being interdisciplinary, what does it mean when a historian goes to a newspaper portal and begins working with their primary sources that way? And so given this transformation of how historians work, and given our changing engagement with the archive, I'm now wondering, is using a digitized newspaper something we should understand as an exercise in interdisciplinarity? And that's because over the last 20 years, we've seen a dramatic shift in how historians use newspapers. 20 years ago or less, this was sort of when I was first a student, historians mainly used their newspapers through microfilm. We would get reels, we would inevitably go to a basement, we would look through page after page after page of newspapers on a microfilm machine. It was boring, it took a lot of time, but while we sat in those basements scrolling through microfilm, we learned a lot. We learned a lot about the context of a global event. We learned a lot about the advertisements. We learned a lot about what column was important and what column wasn't important. We learned a lot about art. But of course, with new technology, almost nobody uses microfilm anymore. We instead do most of our work through keyword searching. Now, this sounds good, but I think most historians uncritically use the interfaces that are presented with them. They just use newspapers, but they don't think about the platform that they're using and what might be there and what might not be there. And because these platforms are so user-friendly, I think we lose something. And I'll use a Canadian example. I went to a university called Queen's University for my undergrad. One of our famous things at that campus was that President Roosevelt visited in 1938 before the Second World War, gave a famous speech. I was giving a lecture there and thought, I will look up that speech in a newspaper. I went to the Toronto Star, and I realized that I couldn't find any mention of his visit in August 1938. And when I went into the newspaper platform, I realized that for some reason, no issues from August of 1938 had been digitized. I had no clue. It was a complete surprise. For some reason, an entire month was missing from this platform. And I only knew this because I looked really deep and caught it. Now, it wasn't because there weren't any issues in August. I read the September issues and they talked about things that had happened in the August issues. But I mention this because if a historian just sits there at the platform and does keyword searches and thinks that they're seeing a complete vision of the past, they wouldn't realize that for some reason a month is missing. And that was literally the first month I went looking for what other gaps might there be. Now, as Antoine and others have mentioned already this morning for me, afternoon for many of you, there are a lot of limitations of search that I don't think historians really know. We don't really know the limitations of OCR. That here in Canada, where the beneficiary would also have some downsides of really being early pioneers in seeing newspapers digitized. The Toronto Star came from Pages of the Past, which was done in 2001, I believe. But it's early OCR, it didn't catch line break hyphenation, and we can see that even if you start looking at best case scenarios, a lot of materials missing. Again, others on this panel have covered limitations of OCR better. And thinking about these platforms and thinking about the affordances, if I look at ProQuest, which is what I use in Canada to do a lot of my media searches, if I decide I want to recreate the experience I used to have as a historian, sitting in a basement, looking at microfilm, I'll pull up here an issue from the 60s. And you'll see if I decide I want to do a deep dive and read, already it's taking me 5 or 6 clicks just to get to page 1 of an issue. And so here I am loading, again, I'm looking at the 60s, I see stories about wiretaps, I see stories about an international earthquake. I decide I want to keep skimming. For some reason, the day I was using this, the forward button wasn't working in the interface. I have to manually type the number. It loads. I manually load it. And if I actually want to zoom in and look at it, in my case, on my system, I have to download the PDF manually and really open it up in another PDF reader to zoom in. Now I go through this example because I would first highlight that this interface, as it's designed, is really trying to make a historian search. It is trying to make me not skim. It's trying to make me use newspapers in a different way than essentially historians have always used newspapers. And it's compounded by the second problem, which is, of course, that digitization is uneven. Here I looked, this was a project I did many years ago, looking at the impact of what happens when a newspaper is digitized, how is it used in Canadian history dissertations. And here we see in 2001, 2 newspapers are digitized. By 2005 onwards, they are cited hundreds of % more than others. And those newspapers that were not digitized are used almost not at all. That in other words, these 2 points to me combine by making an argument that, of course, the more something is digitized, the more it is used. And because of these platforms, the mediation of a source impacts its use. I will use a digitized newspaper far differently than I will use a microfilm newspaper, which has profound implications on how I carry out my scholarship. So the impact of this medium shift is we now interact primarily through keyword search. We don't understand as historians how these databases were constructed, points that have been raised by other speakers today. The text is inaccessible to do transformative digital scholarship with. And my bugbear is we always cite it the same. We cite something from a database A, database B, the Internet Archive on microfilm. We cite it the same, but of course, those are very different documents. So if using an archive is an exercise in interdisciplinarity, perhaps we should think of using online platforms the same way. So in my last minute, what can we do? Well, we can come to conferences like this. I'm not joking. I think this is incredibly useful for all of us to be together here. We can embrace open platforms and tools like the Internet Archive. If, for example, I want to look up a periodical on the Internet Archive, here I will look at The Economist. And we can see here an interface, and the NewsEye demo I saw that Antoine showed looked fantastic. I'm looking forward to playing with that as well. But here we can see I pull up a periodical, and we see an interface that actually works far better for me because it facilitates skimming, it facilitates easy download. Here I'm skimming almost as if I was working with it on a microfilm reel, and crucially I can download the PDF to work with it on my iPad. And it also lines up well with APIs. So here I decided to use the Internet Archives API, and you can see really quickly how I'm going to take that Economist platform. I can see that's what's available to me. I can see the metadata types. Here I download one plain text, and I use this in my teaching because I like to show students, here's what the raw OCR looks like. This is what you're actually keyword searching when you're using an interface. And then my favorite part, I can download one PDF. Or I can download 1,000. It's a very different way of interacting with these resources, thanks to this platform. So what does this mean? When we work with an archive we don't understand, we're engaging with interdisciplinarity. Isn't working with a newspaper that we don't understand one too? Open platforms as much as possible. I know copyright is a thing. And of course, finding ways to translate knowledge. Finding ways to make sure historians know what's going on behind, as we've already talked about today, the black box. So thank you for your attention. Looking forward to the discussion. Thanks to my fellow panelists, and many thanks to you all.
Thank you, Ian. Of course, I would invite you this minute to join my class and let's discuss these things. I'm not sure if I'm with you regarding the newspaper in the basement of our archive, the skimming that we did back then, and also especially the machines that we had to use. It was not only tedious, it was never ending, to say it like this. But still, at this point, Antoine, do you want to introduce your other projects just shortly before we start into a discussion? Otherwise, I would just ask Ian to remain here and ask the others to join us.
No, I didn't have. Sorry, I didn't have anything else planned.
That's fine. That's fine. I think we are well ahead. Although I would listen to each one of you for a very long time, I think we should also start try to start to have a discussion. So my first question to all of you would basically be: we've seen wonderful projects that you're working with, that we are working with. We are reaching the end of our project. Of course, the biggest question now is sustainability. Meaning, so what do we do with the data that we've created? What do we do with the tools? How data management, also source criticism that we have developed, interdisciplinary workflows. So my question for you, my first question to all of you would be sustainability. How can we solve this in a common effort maybe, or how do you solve it in your projects? What would your guesses for the future would be in that respect? So maybe if I can go backwards, starting from Ian.
Certainly. So the question of sustainability is a big one. My first reaction is money is what we always need for sustainability. But we face this with our Archives Unleashed project. We had a first grant. We developed a platform for analyzing web archives. We had it stood up. It was a standalone thing. And we devoted a lot of our time to figure out how to make it sustainable, and we realized it was really only through partnerships. Which strikes me NewsEye was better positioned than we are. So in our case, we did an environment survey. We saw that the Internet Archive was really the only sustainable organization in our sector of the world. And we approached them. We got funding from the Mellon Foundation to do an integration. We set up a plan for the long-term integration of those services. And in our case, we realized we're providing value-add services. Servers are expensive. Computation is expensive. Developer time is expensive. Even if you're not actively developing, you need someone to help patch the problems that are inevitably going to pop up in any digital project. So working with them so we can leverage, their existing stack. So for us, it was really partnerships, and trying to get off that grant train so we could do something good. And maybe it was our national library, maybe it was other organizations, but it was something big that could sustainably host a large platform.
Yeah, you probably name it money to sustain everything you do. Gerben, what are your ideas about this, or how do you manage?
Well, money was the first thing that came to my mind as well when I started thinking about that. Probably everyone's mind. But I actually think, so what we did in the DHDWIS project, or are doing, is already try to think about how do we sustain the website after the project is over. So after we've launched this website, how do we continue it? And that is part funding the website and the hosting. And it's about making sure that the contents are guaranteed. So we've created an international editorial board to keep that running, and we're also trying to establish. So we try to organize a community around that resource, and also a network of correspondents that can help us sort of maintain content. And the other thing is, and I don't know if that happens with a lot of funding agencies these days, when it comes to money, of course, often money is given to just fund the project or the launch of a tool, etc. And then nobody thinks about the money to actually finance keeping it online. But at least in our case, our funder, they didn't put it as a condition, but there was a very polite question when we sent our midterm report, like, look, this is all very good and nice, but how are you actually planning long term to keep this thing alive? And just asking that question already forced us to think about, like, oh yeah, how are we actually going to do that? Are we going to crowdfund this? Are we going to put a PayPal donate button? I mean, this is a relatively small project. It's not like a massive digitization project. So it's much more modest in that sense, but it forced us to think about different models to fund it in the future. And it reminds me a little bit of a discussion last week that took place, I think, on Twitter when Adam Crimble was posing some questions about similar issues. And I think it caused a little bit of a discussion there when he said, he sort of provocatively said, like, well, if I'm a funder and you don't show me that you think about how you want to sustain this in the long term, I don't want to fund you. And again, that caused some discussion, but I like the sort of provocativeness of the comment, because I think it's really good to force people a little bit to think beyond the initial project stage about that long-term perspective. I don't think there are easy answers. How to generate money is always difficult. I think organizing community is perhaps a little bit easier depending on what you're dealing with, and then because that's something that you can bake in right from the start. To start creating that.
Yeah, but seen from a different perspective, like me being a historian, in back times I had a book at the end of my project. I could put it in my shelf behind me. So in this sense, Clemens, sustainability. Some good ideas already here. I think I want to repeat some and maybe extend a little bit on that. So I think it's really important what Gerben said, that we really need to plan already with sustainability in mind when we start writing our grant proposals. So I think that's really an important shift in the mindset to keep that, to really put an emphasis on this from the start. And I think there is more encouragement for doing that now also from funding agencies, thankfully. At the same time, I think, well, you just mentioned the book, the publication. So it's of course a question with the material that is being produced always. So for example, with the software that we produce, we put it on open platforms. It's a privately owned enterprise, GitHub, but they even deposited some stuff in an Arctic code vaults, which probably will exist long after we existed. So something maybe to look into how sustainable that is. But I think also, like, for example, like we do it, and I see a NewsEye project does it similarly. We use, for example, infrastructures like Zenodo for data sets, which have some midterm guaranteed sustainability. I think in the case of Zenodo, it's 15 years guaranteed, which is not long when we speak about 500 years of printing history, but it's a first stepping stone, I think.
And last bit, I think I want to add, I think also it's definitely a question of the money always. There is no point avoiding that topic. But to reduce this problem of the money, I think what we've been trying here, and there's some initiative also specifically in Germany for this, the national research data infrastructure, is to come up with like programs that provide a more long-term vision on hosting and providing access to digital research data, and doing that as a shared responsibility. I think that will be the key to not have like some center organization dealing with all the responsibilities, but to come up with different roles and responsibilities, and somehow divide the effort over many shoulders. I think that would probably be my best guess here.
Mm-hmm. And you're coming a little bit from a different perspective, so to say.
Yes, so I'm of course not an end user, but one of the technology providers. So for us, sustainability is then mainly about our code, where we do most of our development in MATLAB, and once it has to be operational, we translate it into C++. We try not to rely on too many external libraries. If those things, of course, change, then everything might fall into pieces. So of course we have although we're not the end user, we have a similar issues there concerning sustainability, also about so money, but also money to keep people, of course, to have those that developed code. So that's a similar problem, different context. For our end users, we often also advise on the format of the images, because we're mainly doing image processing. That's also important to be future-proof there, not to store the images in a too much compressed way or some funky format that allows you to view them in a nice viewer, but that's also not really future-proof. So yeah. If you have enough space, try to store the originals in as highest quality as possible.
Mm. Yeah, we store our websites, of course, now not only on the university's repositories, but also on the Internet Archive that Ian has been mentioning. But still, at some point, they end up being snapshots and not more than that. Antoine, your ideas about sustainability, we've been pained a little bit with that topic.
Yeah, a lot has been said, and I guess we all share the same issues and the same comments. In our case, it's a bit like Gerben said. It's been, well, the Commission will not let you. You will lose many points if you don't have a sustainability plan in your proposal, which is a good thing, because this is not something that I would have even really thought of as a researcher initially. But in the context of the project, and I think the way I described it, we worked with data from 3 libraries, but always we're hoping to do things that are language independent, and with the goal in the long run to include more languages. So it was kind of clear that already before we started the project that we wanted to do more than is in the project. So I guess that there was some kind of implied will of sustainability, but that's of course a different thing than getting the means for the sustainability. And everyone said funding, and I guess that's what the means actually means. So I mean, we are exploring this. We have explored this for a while now, and that's actually one positive thing. There's always something positive to everything. There's something positive with the project extension that we have that is mainly due to COVID-19, but also for us a good opportunity to have more time to implement this sustainability plan. And we're looking at, well, integration into libraries, for instance, offering services actually to any library. That's one plan, through maybe an external company or a company related to the university. So maybe offering services, offering processing. I mean, we're working out many ideas, Of course, the question is always the funding, and is always how financially sustainable whatever plan is. But of course, the most obvious plans are to do what we academics know how to do, is to get more funding for more projects that include the platform and extensions of the platform. This is what we have done. There's a bit of funding that we already have, and now I think that's maybe what you meant, Eva, when you asked me to talk about the other projects. We have a few other smaller projects for creating teaching material, for creating funded by the region of Nouvelle-Aquitaine, where La Rochelle is. We have some funding for integrating local newspapers, French-speaking local newspapers. So of course, in that way, we get some money to integrate the new data, and we get also some money to maintain and improve the demonstrator. But of course, all of this is just 2 more years, so it doesn't qualify as sustainability. It's just survival. But the rest of it is I think also what Clemens mentioned is, well, we try to go for open science. The code is available. What worries me always is that the code has been available for 1 year, but no one is, maybe people are using it, but no one is contributing. So how can we think that people will contribute when the project is done? Let's see. Yeah. I wanted to say one more thing, sorry, because I don't want to end on this very negative note. It's a very interesting, especially in the context of newspapers. It's a very interesting time because we had almost simultaneously at the same time. NewsEye started an Impresso that I'm sure many people here know, started a Swiss Luxembourg project with actually very similar goals. There's European newspapers. There was Oceanic Exchange that ended a bit earlier. There's several projects that Clemens mentioned, and there's like somehow, I don't know, the planets are aligning, or everyone is. There were many projects, and also, sorry, the British one, Living with Machines, has a good share of work on newspapers and so on. So somehow there was a lot of funding by lots of agencies towards newspapers, and I think we are really at crossroad here with many parallel developments that have to be combined together. So that's one of the things we have to work on, I think, maybe all together. I mean, in the workshop that Clemens mentioned in Dachstuhl, which is supposed to be in next year, for me, it's like one of the key targets of this workshop, and maybe we have to address it earlier on how to combine and what to take in every platform to maybe get the most out of every project and keep it alive together. I guess that maybe sums up what everybody said. It's easy to speak out.
But maybe one thing we always keep forgetting is education, of course, teaching what we are actually bringing out of our projects, trying to get this across open science and all the platforms that we have. Of course, also teaching and bringing it on to the next generations could be a sustainability plan, so to say. And at least in our project, Antoine, as you know, we are hoping to have the libraries join us, or basically use our educational material for in the future, which would be something great also for us. But the time is running, and I have a second question that we have been dealing with intensively in our project, and I was wondering I mean, most of you have already mentioned this: interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity, whatever you want to call it. So this seems to be interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity seems to be the key to success. But how successful is actually interdisciplinarity? And what does it mean to work interdisciplinarity? Is that I try to force my ways as a historian, my ways of working to the machine, or to you computer scientists to the libraries, or vice versa? And how can successful interdisciplinarity work in your opinion? Antoine?
In our case, as you know, of course, I think what helped a lot, I think the key challenge is it's always, this is a very common things to say, but to understand each other, to make sure that people are on the same page, that the expectations are clear. I think especially in the academic world, computer scientists are usually, just like me actually, are researchers in computer science, and they are not interested in doing software. They are interested in new challenges that they can tackle and where they can contribute to computer science research. That's not always, I mean, that expectation has to be clear. It means, well, many things have to be clarified. And of course, that you could say something similar on the side of historians. I mean, you don't want to I mean, it's not exciting for you to, we discussed this many times. It's not, of course, it's not exciting to historians, no one thinks that, to make annotations of person names in 200 pages of newspapers. But you kind of have to do it so that we can do better in computer science and so that you can get the data that you want in humanities. So I think it's all about understanding and knowing what to expect from the start. And in the case of NewsEye, we were very lucky. I think it's partly chance that we had a nice group of people, and we had some seed funding so that we could meet together and prepare the proposal together. So we actually met in real life and had 2 brainstorming sessions of I think 2 days, or to work together and be very clear about who does what. I suppose that helped the proposal to be more successful because it was probably clearer, but also it means when the project was funded, everybody knew what to expect, and kicking off was very, very easy, and expectations were in the right place.
Yeah, I think it was a bit more complicated than that, as it turned out. Yeah. But yes, you were basically right, and I think we were very successful. But still, maybe I can pass on to Anne, and maybe I can ask Matthias Arnold to switch off his camera, if you don't mind. Anne, please go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, it's funny. So his camera is still on, but he left. Yeah, okay, fine. I was checking that. There's 2 parts, and like Antoine said, I don't want to end with the negative note, so I'll start with the negative note. For me, interdisciplinarity is first of all very difficult to find funding, and then we're back to the money point. So as a mathematician, if we apply for funding and we say it's interdisciplinary, then
oh, pity. I fear we've lost Anne. Anne, I'm afraid nobody can hear her, right? No, I'm afraid we lost Anne, and we'll just pass on to Clemens. Oh, there you're back. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, we lost you in the middle of the sentence there.
Sorry. That there was nothing indicating here that my connection was bad, but it must have been. Sorry. So yeah, I'll repeat. So it's very difficult to find funding as a mathematician in an interdisciplinary context. So if we would go to a funding organization under the denominator of mathematics, they'll freak out if it's for cultural heritage. If we go to interdisciplinarity, then they want that you have an advancement on a fundamental level in both the use case field as the technology provider. For the applied grants, then they're always focused on finding a return on investment in the Flemish industry. And again, if we go for a cultural heritage, that does not suit that Flemish industry. So we have basically only the federal fundings because our cultural institutions are mostly federal organizations, and then in that context we can find funding, and on the European level, luckily. So that's the negative side of working interdisciplinary, unfortunately. On the positive side is that I really love to work in an interdisciplinary context, because it gives you problems or real world problems that you try to solve, but then from a fundamentally new way. Not just grabbing existing technology together, but then for sure from a math department point of view, we can really develop new mathematics in order to make a difference. And for me, that's so satisfying that I merely only work in an interdisciplinary context.
That's good to hear. And also we also here in Austria, for example, we hope that this funding policy is changing, or actually we have had signals that it is changing, but of course this is true also here for us. Clemens.
Yeah, now I'm muted. So yeah, for me it's a really tricky question, but I think, well, for me it's somehow I have to answer it from the praxis maybe, because so I'm a studied philosopher, and now I do mainly computer science in a library. So it's kind of like I stumbled into this somehow, but I think it's possibly also, of course, an effect of projects in the past. So actually, I'm often reminded one of the most major projects in this area that I was involved in, the Impact project, improving access to text in the 2009 to 2012, I think, or 2007 to 2012. It was a huge project, and many people were maybe not so happy with the results in terms of tangible outcomes, but for those who participated in the project, we felt it was hugely beneficial to maybe spend the first 2 years. It was one of those glorious times when we could still have these large-scale integrating projects of 4 or 5 years with lots of partners. And we took the first 2 years together with computer scientists, librarians, book historians, computational linguists, database specialists, just talking to each other, having like meetings over and over and talking to each other. And really we could see that these conversations, they kind of culminated to a point where we thought, even like after 2 years, we understand each other better than we did initially. And I think, yeah, in that sense, it just comes from doing it. So I'm still struggling when I go to some of the computer science conferences like ICTA, and I sit in some of the sessions, and with my like minor computer science degree, I'm still trying to follow, but expose yourself to these other disciplines. And I mean, I think it can just come from curiosity, but then also from the joy and the inspiration from working with colleagues from other domains. But for me, I think it's always just worked by really doing it and having lots of communication. And yeah, again, for this, I'm sorry, I have to end on the sad note this time. For that, we need, again, projects and funding.
Yeah, you're right, probably, Clemens. I agree. Gerben, you're doing wonderful projects in Luxembourg, even if you're sitting in Berlin right now. How is your impression, or how are your experiences with interdisciplinarity? Are we as humanities people lost in this environment? Do we have to give up our traditional approaches?
But I guess we're a little bit lucky in Luxembourg that our funding agency seems to recognize interdisciplinarity and its importance a little bit more. So there are certain funding streams where you can actually bring different disciplines together. But we also have the experience that it's not so easy to do that. I mean, success there is really, in the end, I think, measured by can you create a certain common ground? And can the two perspectives, if you bring two disciplines, let's say computer science and historians together, can that really generate new insights? And are people not operating on sort of parallel tracks? That's, of course, the big challenge. But I would also like to connect a bit to what Clemens said, which I think is very important. Interdisciplinarity also operates on a personal level, and it's almost a matter of attitude, of how you look beyond the boundaries of your own discipline. Try to integrate those in your work and hopefully generate new insights by doing that, but also be honest about the failures. It's also about trial and error. And by recognizing that, figuring out what works and doesn't work. And if we're not open about that, it also becomes very difficult to learn from that. So that would be my input there. Yeah.
Ian.
I'm nodding along because I agree with everything that's been said. The only thing I'd really add is, from a Canadian perspective, we're trying to incentivize interdisciplinary work. And part of it, I think, is showcasing like what we have here. That sometimes I think interdisciplinarity gets captured by like a mechanical engineer wanting to work with a chemical engineer, when we're really thinking about a computer scientist working with a historian. so I think it's worth talking about that a little bit. And really, to me, making this happen is two parts. And one is incentivizing. It's money. In Canada, where we launched this cool new grant program, the New Frontiers in Research Fund, where you have to be high risk, you have to be interdisciplinarity. They're trying to fund stuff that a historian might not want to fund and a computer scientist might not want to fund. But if you get a bunch of interdisciplinary scholars like myself together in a room, we take chances on files. So I think it's an element of designing new funding programs and adding to risk, because interdisciplinary work is inherently risky, and funders don't always like risk. And then secondly is sort of what we said is just, good faith, as I think we kicked off with Eva's comments. As a historian, I need to listen to computer scientists and figure out, hey, what do you need for your career?